Okay, so in the last video we created the two handlers, and when we left I was trying to push my commit. Um, let's try doing that again, but I realized I shouldn't be putting master. It's actually main, so let's check to see that that works. Okay, good. So I have pushed my changes and they should be visible here. Right, good. Great. And notice that it's telling me what was my last commit message. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. So what we want to do, since this code will be repeated a lot, let's move it to its own function. So let's create a helpers function similar to what we did uh, in the previous series that we worked on. So I'm going to use touch. Okay. We're going to call it helpers. Okay, that go. All right, so we put anything that we tend to use a lot. We abstract it out, we refactor it out, and we place it in the helpers.go file. All right. Okay. Great. So this is definitely a part of main. Package main. Um, so let me just copy this stuff from here. Okay. So name of our file is helpers.go. It's a part of main package. We don't need FMT. Okay. The only thing we need added is errors. Okay. Because we want to be able to send back an error message. Okay. So this function actually a method because we're going to make it a method on application. We're going to call it read ID param. Okay, that's a wonderful name, read ID param. And of course, it needs a request. Okay, right. So the request object will be passed in. All right. And once we have the request object, we can get the context, and then we can process that context. Now, once that's done, we want to return two things. We want to return the actual ID, okay, which is of course int 64, and we also want to return an error message. All right, so those are the things we want to return. So again, the code will be familiar to you. All we want to do is to, so I'll just move this code from here. Okay, so I'll move all of this. Okay. All right, I'll put that here. All right, so definitely you want to get the context. Okay, definitely you want to get the ID. Okay, and if we find out, okay, if we find out that there's an error or the ID that we got back and we convert it to an int is less than 1, then we don't want to return http dot not found. We want to actually return 0. Okay, and then we want to return an error message. So let's just create a new error message, errors.new, and the error message will be something like invalid ID parameter. All right, so that's what we want to return. Now, obviously, If there are no error messages, if it's a valid parameter, then we simply want to return that parameter and nil to signify no error. Okay, and so this is our method, read ID param. So now I can go back to my schools.go and I can simply call this method. Okay, now I know that it will return an ID and I know that it will return an error message. So I will simply say ID, comma error, okay, and of course it's an app, all right, and I will simply give it the request object R. Now, once I have done that, I need to check for errors. So if error not equal to nil, notice I'm only checking for not equals to nil because the method has already checked to see if the parameter is less than 1. So we don't need to do that. All we need to do here is check to see if it's an error message. If error not equals to nil, all right, then we will simply say HTTP that not found. Okay. Okay. And of course, we need to return so that we leave this handler. Otherwise, go ahead and print the ID. Okay. So that's the change that I wanted to make. So now we have much less code to worry about, right? So it's just one line and then checking for the error. Okay, so let's ensure that this still works. So let's open my terminal. Let's run the server and let's check a few of our endpoints. Okay, works. Put 0 should not work. Good. -1 should not work. Good. Put text should not work. Good. Okay, so everything seems to be working. So let me go ahead and create another commit. So git status. All right, so we notice we need to make these, need to add these changes. So git add. Okay, and then let's simply git commit, and I will say refactored, removed the code that checks for the ID parameter. So I should probably say moved. Move the code that checks for the ID parameter into its own method. Okay. And that method is, what was the name of my method again? Read ID parameter. Read ID parameter. Param. Read ID param. Let's make sure I have that right. Read ID param. Yeah, I got that right. So move the code that checks for the ID parameter into its own method, read param. So maybe I should put a single quote. Okay. All right, let's close that. Okay. And so let me push this to GitHub. Okay. Great. So our change should now be visible. All right, here we go. Okay. So that's it. We're making progress, and I will see you in the next lesson.